Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Today we are going to go with and talk a bit about accessibility. That's why together with me I have an expert in this field, Amy Carney. Amy, tell us a few things about yourself and unmute yourself. Okay.
I didn't want to interrupt. Um, Hi, I'm Amy Carney. I live up in Alaska on the Panhandle, and I've been doing accessibility for the past 4 to 5 years. It started with my work, the same of as a web developer. I was interested that there was an issue, and our work needed to do something about that. I was working for government at the time, and then I just ran with it, started doing searches online and getting into it, found that a certification existed, which is just the path I needed. So I went with the certification, and now I'm doing this for a living and self-employed doing such. So it's been quite a journey, and it's been very rewarding.
Yes, and now you are even doing a webinar with us, which is a great thing for mostly for us because while we are great when it comes to CI/CD, today me too is going to learn a bit about accessibility. So, uh, also, I will be your host today, like always. My name is Maciek Palmowski. I work as a WordPress ambassador at Buddy and a regular webinar host. So, before we will start explaining what we should do to create accessible websites, if you have any questions, you can post them in Facebook or YouTube comments. It depends when you are watching us. Also, if you like our webinars, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel because there are few interesting things apart from the recordings of all our webinars. So, Amy, I, I'm passing the mic to you. So, uh, good luck.
Okay, well, we will start out with the slideshow. Let's see if I can get that started here. Okay, so you came to see how to design accessible websites. Hopefully, you're in the right room here. Today, I'm hoping mostly that you walk away with a better understanding about who people with disabilities are. Without that understanding, it's really hard to move forward and to realize the need for accessibility and who you're serving in that regard. I'm hoping that you can learn about what barriers they face, again, that empowers you to make better choices for your development team, your design team, even just for an administrative team. And also, I'd like you to feel empowered to advocate for accessibility within your organization. So once you've learned about people with disabilities, challenges that they face, the next step is being able to speak up and advocate for that and make those decisions proactively with your organization. And that often turns out to be the hardest part. So we toss around the word accessibility quite a bit. And sometimes it's hard to get our heads around. We know it exists, we know it has something to do with people with disabilities. So, what are we aiming for? Well, accessibility is making websites and apps work well for people with disabilities. So, we center people with disabilities, is the reason for accessibility. But accessibility helps people perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with the web. So just because you can get on the web and you see things a certain way, hear things a certain way, maybe use your mouse to access it, um, it's it's not necessarily the way other people access it. So just realizing that there are so many ways to access the internet, and we need to make those ways accessible for everyone. What accessibility is not is a lot of people get caught up with checklists of just saying check, 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 okay, it's accessible without actually doing any kind of usability testing, even doing your own testing, like very basic things like a keyboard check to say like, well, I think it's keyboard accessible because the code says so. Well, did you check to do that and to make sure it works? So you're not just trying to do a checklist, you're trying to make sure that something really does work for somebody. Standards, it's not just about a set of standards. So WCAG is a really good start, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but it's not the be all. WCAG was meant to be advocating for people with disabilities and to get people started on what they need to be doing, and then guiding them when you're like, well, I don't know how to make this friendly for a screen reader. They help you do that. And it's not just a set of laws. The laws are there to protect people with disabilities, to give them their civil right of access to information that is free to the public. But if you're just saying, well, okay, technically I am within the law, that's not really making something accessible if you're kind of skirting around what the real problems are on your website. 4 reasons why you should make it accessible. So these you can even take with you in your organization as you're trying to advocate. First and foremost, it's important to know that accessibility is essential for several people. And then it actually makes it useful for everybody. So you'll find out that just like curb cuts, that, just because the curb cut was made for someone who uses a wheelchair, it benefits people who use strollers, people who might have a harder time stepping up and down off the curb. And so, again, it's essential for some, useful for all. It's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to empower somebody with their given civil rights. Also, it's good for business. So if you're trying to make a case in your organization, let them know that it's actually good when you include more people. It usually means more business, because people with disabilities do have money to spend. And when you turn them away by making your site inaccessible, then they find someone else where that service is accessible to them. And lastly, hopefully this isn't the drive in your organization, but it's true. It is the law in many places. The Worldwide Web Consortium's Web Accessibility Initiative website, they actually have a list of all the different laws throughout the world. So, here I am in the United States, and there are specific laws here, but there are other laws, and I'm not well versed in those. But luckily, the W3C way has that for you. So if you're curious about your own laws in your country, you can find that.
I just wanted to say that the case you made about strollers and accessibility is a quite interesting one, because I think that this is the moment when most non-disabled people learn about accessibility in a practical way, when they try to push their stroller around the city. I mean, I learned this too. I mean, okay, I have glasses, so I already know that small fonts can be also a dreading problem. But when it comes to more general accessibility, yes, stroller can really change your world, and you can start seeing it in a totally different light. So
It's true. Yeah, parents know. And the whole one-handed thing, you're holding your baby with one arm, and how much can you accomplish with the other arm? And so it gives you just a tiny light. It's not the same, but it definitely gives you a light into that world. So after discussing what accessibility is and centering back to disability, disability is essentially a mismatch between from a lot of that medical model of my disability is because, so I personally do have a visual impairment. And instead of focusing on, like I don't see like everyone else. Well, part of the problem for me is that many things are not designed for me. So things are usually a lot of black on white, which I have a light sensitivity. So when I have a lot of lights around me, when I have a bright screen at me, it diminishes my sight even more of what I could see. By default, a lot of fonts are kind of at for prints, a lot of 12 point or sometimes a 10 point, and that's not easy for me to read. And I know a lot of times as developers, we say, well, okay, by default, because the browsers have chosen this 16 pixels is good. Well, for me, I have to change settings on my computer because that's not good enough for me. So by default, things are not designed for me and my vision. But luckily, there's assistive technology and different techniques I can use to make it friendly for me. A disability is not just about a medical diagnosis. We can try to look at people as their diagnosis, but really they are people, and there's just a mismatch between them and the design that people do. It's not just legal jargon. I know laws need specifics and metrics that happen. So that way people with disabilities can have specific services, but it's not a good focus to have on the disability. And also the terms different ability or special needs are usually loathed by the disability community. So watch some of your language there. The best thing is if you do know someone with a disability, ask how they preferred to be referred to. Disabilities in the United States, the CDC actually says that 26 of the population has a disability, and I'd like to note that that's people who do report their disability. A lot of times disabilities can be visible or hidden, and because of that, some people who have hidden disabilities, they may not report it for many reasons. Also, disabilities can be static or dynamic. Again, my visual impairment, it can depend on the lighting. I can be doing really well, and then when the environment changes on me or the environment isn't ideal, suddenly I feel more low vision. So it really changes, or it can depend on how tired I am and how well my brain and my eyes want to work well together. Diagnosed and undiagnosed, some people I know, older people are finding out that they have ADHD in their 50s because it just wasn't available to them to talk about it or to get tested. And so some people are carrying disabilities with them that they're not even sure what it is, but they know that there's a struggle there because things are not designed for them. And again, reported, unreported, you choose that. For me personally, sometimes I report it. A lot of times I'm passing enough that, you know what, my disability on a job application doesn't really need to be reported, because what does that have to do with the job I'm doing? If I can do my job, what is it your business to know if I have a disability or not? So, and despite the laws, there's still discrimination there. So that doesn't need to be in the decision process. So it's for many reasons that people may or may not report, because discrimination is still alive and well today. And so if somebody wants to carry on their life and be considered normal, then they may not report it. But sometimes reporting has to do with they feel forced to report because there's a service that they need in order for them to overcome an accessibility issue. Also, disability may or may not involve assistive technology. For someone who is blind, oftentimes they will use a screen reader. It really depends on the person and how they're trained, what kind of help that they get, or what they need. And for me, I use a magnification tool as needed, but it's not all the time. So it's a lot of disability isn't just binary. It's not it is or it isn't. It's a lot of weird in betweens, and that makes it a challenge, especially for web developers, that we want a lot of solid tech specs. We want to say, okay, this particular thing is gonna work and solve the problem, but it's not, and it's a very hard thing sometimes to grasp accessibility and make things usable for all people. You have to be constantly thinking about things. The good news is that developers are problem solvers. And so, we can think about these things and we can find solutions and try to make things where they are flexible to the preference of the user. But if you're in a real hurry and you have time constraints and budget constraints, it does get difficult, because then you want specific things, be done with it, and move on to the next thing. to help you visualize different disabilities and not just think about in terms of the abstract. Um, I made this list, which is definitely not all encompassing, but it's to help people understand maybe there is somebody in your life that you know personally, whether family or friends, that do have a disability, and to help think of people with disabilities as people. So maybe you don't have a blind friend, but you have a friend who's colorblind. And so you can appreciate that there's a struggle there, that there's certain challenges they face. And sometimes people are willing to talk about it to other trusted people. And so you can learn through them a lot of times if they feel safe talking to you about it. So I've gotten a chance to talk to different people. The more open I can be about my own, then they could be open about it. And so for visual disabilities, that can encompass blind, deaf blind, low vision, colorblind. Auditory disabilities, you have deaf or hard of hearing or deaf blind. Cognitive disabilities may include dyslexia, ADHD. There's so much more probably in that realm that I'm just picking common things that maybe you know someone who has dyslexia, maybe you know someone who has ADHD, and what are some of the barriers they might encounter that you don't even realize online. Physical disabilities such as arthritis, quadriplegia, RCI, which is repetitive strain injury, neurological such as autism or cerebral palsy, and then speech, of course, where someone is non-vocal or sometimes partially non-vocal.
I mean, I think that everyone had a chance to meet a person with a temporary disability called broken arm or broken
Yes,
leg.
yes.
This is this is also a really interesting case because why we often talk about people with disabilities, we think of them that their disability is constant, that they are blind and they will be blind, and there are many disabilities that we have only for some time, because when we broke our arm after a month or sometimes longer, everything is back to normal. But during this time, yes, we are disabled, and this is and let's be honest, this is sometimes a very good lesson for some people um, to understand that that we are not bulletproof, that we can become disabled out of the blue, and yes, that's why we should care about accessibility so much, because we never know when we will become disabled.
Exactly. And this is talked about in the accessibility community. A lot of times, the phrase that everyone is, if they don't have a disability now, they are temporarily abled. Because for one, everyone is going to get old. Well, we hope. Everybody hopes for a long life. And there's going to be a point where when you hit older age, sight starts to deteriorate, hearing can start to deteriorate. Your muscles aren't going to do what they used to do. And you may get something like arthritis or RSI. And so right now we're living on, you know, that assumption that we are immortal and we're going to be, non-disabled for the rest of our lives. So really you're investing in your future when you make things accessible. And so it's good to remember. And I agree with you that people have been temporary disabilities are a thing. And sometimes an environment is disabling for people where maybe you don't have a disability every day, all the time, but you get in a situation where you are unable to do something. Um, so, and it could be even as simple as, like, oh, I'm out with my phone and trying to access the internet, but either things are too loud or the light around me is too bright. And so I can't really work with this. And that's where accessibility does benefit those people as well. Like if you have captions because you can't hear what sound it is, well, you could still be able to get the content that you need. Or same with be able to change the contrast on your phone and have that flexibility, then it makes that visual text more accessible to you. So ways that people with disabilities often bridge the gap are usually with assistive technology or sometimes even strategies that they have. One of them is text-to-speech software, which is usually called a screen reader. And what it does is a piece of software on your device will read out loud text. This is when it becomes important for text for images. So you're describing an image. So then as everything for a screen reader needs to be in some kind of text format. And so it goes through there and reads all of that. Sometimes an extension of that text-to-speech software has an output device called a Braille reader. And so a person can actually feel the dots coming up and it's read to them that way. I actually want to do a quick switch here, the Braille display, and go over to my browser. And so if you need to see an example of that, and here's the website. And I don't know if it's best to drop some of these links. Is there a way we can do that for people or provide that at the end, some of the resources that I share?
I think, yes, you can drop them all, and we will put them all on the webinar page so everyone will have access to them, because I see
Okay,
a
yeah.
lot of tabs and they're probably full of interesting things. So
Okay, great. So one resource I wanted to share, which I already passed on, there's the CDC page. There's the Y page. I'll share those links. But what I want to get at is this is Haben Girma, and she is deafblind. And she has done some amazing things as far as for advocating for people with disabilities, probably stemming from her own disability. She actually made it, graduated from law school. Harvard Law School, wrote a memoir about the whole experience. And here on this YouTube video, she talks about the importance of her Braille reader and how she communicates with people. And when this Braille reader died after so much use, after several years, and just how disabling that is, because this is her communication tool, is that she can connect it wirelessly to another keyboard. And so someone else can type a message to her and she reads that message through the Braille display in the bottom, and then she can either speak to them or type back. And so it also uses it with her smartphone and such. So she's also available on Twitter. She does everything else that a lot of younger people do. And so, but this is a very critical and essential device for her to use to be connected and to use the internet. And another one while I'm on here, oh, by the way, DQ has some wonderful resources. If you need to test with a screen reader, they have all the keyboard shortcuts. So here is a YouTube channel for Christopher Hills. I forget where he's at, if he's in Australia. You know, it's been a while since I watched his videos, but these were some of the first videos that I was looking at. He would make these videos. He has cerebral palsy, and he shows off a lot of what his life is like and accessing things. But he did all his own video editing, and he uses like a switch device. And so he's got basically like a button that acts as a switch, and he presses it, and that gives him access to his iPad and to his computer. And so he does all these different things, and his videos really show like the things that he uses and the things that he likes to do. It's really fascinating, and it gives you a perspective into somebody else's life that might not be like you. Another thing is Windows high contrast mode, and I'll just do a quick demo. I've used this a lot, especially when I've been on Windows and spend a lot of time. This isn't available on Macs, unfortunately. Mac does have like an inverse thing going on, and you can change some of your contrast stuff, but it doesn't work as well for me as I'd like it to. So thank goodness that dark mode became a trend. But Windows high contrast mode, if you press Shift, Alt, and print screen, and it'll come up with a message saying, you know, do you mean to do that? It's going to put you in a high contrast mode. This always takes just a second for it to load. I don't know if it depends on the processor or what. But what I have my high contrast mode settings as is I get yellow text and a black background, and that is my preference. And let me go ahead and get out of this so you can see. So now my slides have all been overcome by this color scheme, and I get this brighter yellow and this black background, and that's what it does. And then things that are either clickable or need to be highlighted, you can see like there's a green border around them. They say it works best with Edge or Internet Explorer because those are all Microsoft, and this is a Microsoft thing. But I am a Firefox user, and so, but for the most part, I found I haven't had too many troubles with Firefox. Maybe just some like little tiny differences. But over to the side where there are more videos here, like on this YouTube, you can see the links. If you can see, the links are in purple. And so, and these are all settings that I did. Windows high contrast mode lets you do black on white for people who need that color scheme, white on black. You could do your own custom colors, whatever works best for you. And so I found what this does for me, because I have more of a light sensitivity. And when I had like 3 screens at work, and then these fluorescent lights overhead, and then these big windows looking out on the beautiful mountains of Alaska, you know, and the snow reflecting on that, it was really intense for me, and I would get headaches. And so, and I would try to wear like a cap overhead, like a visor, to try to block out some of the lights around me. But the 3 monitors is a lot too. So this would dampen all of that down. Now, it does get tricky for someone who would do web designing, and when you need to focus on specific colors, I would have to switch back and forth, and that was okay. But you know what this does, and I'll go to the WCCA site so you see it as a regular website. And it looks like they chose to do a bunch of borders, but you know, clickable areas are green for me, and you can really, it really stands out too. So I'm not left out as far as I know where my links are and how things are working. And then just to give Buddy a hard time here, you know, these are fine up here because I can see the green, and I can see the visited of where I've been to with the purple. And this is great because I could see, oh, there's a text box here. And so I know that there's something I could fill out. Here's the outline of the button. That's great. But some things that I was running across is when I started tabbing through, you know, some of these things. Actually, I'm going to refresh because I did a little code editing earlier in the dev tools. But if you're using something that's like through these different services for GitHub and Slack, and you can't see where you're at. And that's why if you ever read that outline 0 is such a bad thing, well, this is one of the primary reasons why, because I cannot see where I'm going it at. And I don't think you can either. And if I'm zoomed in, which sometimes I've done that before by using the Windows and plus key, or sometimes I'll zoom with the browser. Well, you might as well forget that I'm not looking down at that little section here that sometimes reveals to you that this is where a website goes. That's obscure to me at that point, and for anyone who uses magnification. So outline 0 is bad for Windows high contrast mode users. I'm going to switch back so we can look at some of the other things on my list. And I also make my mouse pointer also that bright yellow. That's a customization for me so I can see my mouse pointer. Okay, what am I at here? Okay, so dark mode, I included that in there because it's benefited me as someone who has light sensitivity and a visual impairment. But now it's available to everyone. It's just another thing that makes it usable for people. I've heard from several developers that it's been very nice to work in dark mode when they're doing, you know, staring at its screen later at night, and it's not so glaring at you. So that's something that's benefit everyone, but it becomes an accessibility issue. Sometimes even offering dark mode in regard to your website. So some people who have heavy text sites like blogs, it's nice to have an either or option, whether you code that in through the which prefers color scheme option, or just giving them a button that they can see to say, would you prefer dark mode or light mode to read? And they can do that. And I've seen that on a few blogs. And that is a really nice option, especially for me, because a lot of times I've leaned on reader mode, which doesn't always work for every website. And again, that's another issue. And so I don't always have to use reader mode if somebody offers me a dark mode. Magnification, zoom, captions and transcripts, mostly should know about that if you watch YouTube about captions. Audio description is usually for people with visual impairments. It describes the things that they cannot see. So if there's no conversation involved, but something's happening, a car is blowing up, it'll be said that a car is blowing up. Switch devices that I was exposing to you to with Christopher Hills. And then there are some people who use voice command, which is strictly instead of using a mouse or a keyboard, they can talk to their computer. That's becoming more available to people now. Before you had to have just special software, but it's nice to see some of these things are becoming more common because this software, it can be very expensive to be disabled because sometimes getting the technology or devices that you need can be hard to pay for. Common failures on the web, according to WebAIM, who has done their study, they're good, reliable resources. They've done research the last couple of years of doing this whole spidering through the web and collecting data on home pages and what some of the common accessibility fails are. Low contrast is still coming in at the top. People are using this whole design trend of kind of a gray on white, and that makes it hard for people to see. Wait until you get older. You'll find out if you don't have any visual problems now. And sometimes that lighter weight font is difficult to see, but they're basing it on color here. Missing alternate text for images. Just, again, for things that aren't decorative, you need to include a description. Otherwise, that image makes no sense to somebody. A lot of times it just reads the file name to the screen reader. Missing form input labels. We were just having a conversation earlier about placeholder text. And placeholder text is kind of accessible, but it really depends on the screen reader and even the settings of that text-to-speech software. So a lot of times placeholder text isn't reliable. The best thing is to have the label element paired with the for attribute, because I saw this recently on our US COVID site where they were wanting to quickly send out tests to people in the US, and faux pas, they had the label element for the forms, but there was no for attribute. So it was still inaccessible to people, but somebody alerted them and they fixed it within a week. But how embarrassing. So you need to use that where it's reliable. And empty links, I'm not even sure how that's really happening, but it is where somebody has an empty link. I think what happens is maybe like somebody has probably an image button and there's no kind of accessible name with it, most likely. Missing document language, again, I'm not sure how that's happening. It's almost 29% of home pages. And I always think that's just kind of like one of the default things that happens when you're doing up a page to include, language, English or whatever. But empty buttons, I think that's the same problem with the empty links. They probably have an image and there's no accessible name that goes with it, whether they have a visually hidden text or an ARIA label, it's not there. So things you can do, trying to get right into our top 10 here, unless there's anything that we need to address before that.
No, I think let's go with it, and after this we will have a lot of questions to answer. So
okay, good. Well, I'm just going to go through these quick so we do have time. And some of them, these are all tips to just get you started, whether you're a developer, whether you're a designer. A lot of them are kind of design team oriented or even project management oriented or budgeting or stuff, because the earlier you can address accessibility, the better. But a lot of these things can also be taken care of by developers if they need to have conversations with different people. So I put captions, transcripts, and audio description first, just because this is the thing that is going to have a budget conversation. So we do have auto captions, but um, as my deaf hard of hearing friend Meryl Evans would say, that auto corrections. She thinks a lot of those are terrible. A lot of times they're inaccurate. There's so much more to captions than just the verbatim of what's happening, but it happens with the appropriate spacing and the line breaks. And so having a professional or someone who's trained or more familiar with creating captions makes it so much easier for somebody who relies on captions. Transcripts, again, I think that YouTube will output those where somebody can then download a file, because there's people deafblind for sure, like Haben. She would need transcripts because she's not going to see or hear the YouTube video well, if at all. So she would be reading the transcript through her Braille reader. But there are other people who use transcripts for various reasons. I have a friend that he prefers transcripts because he can just get through it faster. His audio processing, he finds that reading goes faster with him than him trying to take in sound. And so having those available benefit many people. Audio descriptions, that usually does cost more because you have to have a professional then insert an added audio layer that then describes, depending on what you have. Like this webinar doesn't really need audio descriptions, but having captions and transcriptions for this webinar will be important for many people. So that's something that once you start planning earlier, it's not like, oh, well, we just did this video, we can't offer these an accessible video for people. So are we going to ditch the video? Was that a waste of money? We could have just budgeted for just a little bit more for service like Rev or Caption Sync or something like that, depending on what's available in your area.
Yes, and let's be honest, Rev is really affordable. It's because as you said, this is the only part that you have to budget, and I know because I had to do it with this webinar before.
That was my stipulation.
Yes, and then I learned that Rev is really affordable. I mean, I understand that maybe when you are producing like hundreds of videos per month, it really can cost a lot. But doing few webinars every month, it's really affordable. You should be able to do it. You will have transcripts, and even if the accessibility wasn't your target to have this transcript, you will get better SEO for your website, because Google also reads text better rather than what happened in the video. And we know how this auto captioning works. The ways I saw my name and surname were guessed by Google, by Facebook. It's really remarkable. Really, I don't think they ever wrote Maciek Palmowski correctly. So
if you have, it's very I think especially American English oriented. And so anytime you have an accent, it gets really interesting. And then I get embarrassed for any kind of, like Alaska Native stuff that gets auto captioned because it's trying to do it in English. And a lot of interesting words just come out of that when they're trying to post in something like Quinkit or Aleut. So color contrast, you definitely want things to pop. The more contrast is usually better. The bare minimum is 4.5 to 1. There are lots of color contrast checkers available for free online. You have the PAS yellow color contrast. I'll drop that link in with that list of things. The 8 shapes does a nice grid. So especially when I do design projects and have to come up with a color scheme, I've leaned on that a lot to get an idea They're not perfect because there are sometimes little tricks like, well, red and black together don't go well for colorblind people. So sure, the contrast automated check says that it might be fine, but that little trick of red and black, they blend together for people who are red-green colorblind. So that's color contrast is definitely a design issue, but also it helps if the developer or QA person is paying attention as well. Alternate colors, as I talked about, offering dark mode on your text-heavy site is helpful to people like me. So you can be considerate of Windows high contrast mode users. Remember that outline 0 is often a very bad thing, and there's usually not a good reason to use it. You could use outline 2 pix solid transparent, and it does the same effect where it's not affecting the pretty design for what you're seeing in your Sigma file, but it also benefits people with Windows high contrast mode. SVGs can be problematic, so just remember when you're choosing a color for your SVG that sometimes a black one will disappear. Then for people like me who use Windows high contrast mode, and suddenly it's just black, and I don't know that it's there. And I've seen this happen for menu hamburger bars, where it's like, oh, I didn't even know something was there. And especially if there's no outline to something that's clickable, then I really don't know it's there. And then sometimes if they have the outline, but I don't know what it does because I just see this outline, and then I can guess like, well, based on location, is that a menu? Click it. Oh, okay, it's the menu. So just being aware that colors aren't always all what they seem. What you are intending for your color scheme, you need to remember that other color schemes happen. And you shouldn't be relying on color alone anyhow for any messages, because you have people who are colorblind that aren't going to see the same colors, and you need a contrast. Typography, things you need to be aware of. So as I had mentioned earlier for myself, that default 16 pix, that's fine, but please don't think in terms of pixels. Be using M and RIM, because that lets me, when I need to zoom into my browser, so I'm doing the Control++, the prints will go along with it. It won't just stay fixed as little while things are getting big. Trying to lean on those standard fonts that are close and more legible to read, like Arial, Times New Roman. I know these can be boring, but if you find things that are similar to them, where they look very standard, not too fancy, it just makes it easier to read for so many different people. So for like people like me, people who have dyslexia, I know we can go back and forth about which is better, sans serif or serif or dyslexia, but really the best thing is to stick as close to standard fonts as you can, and people will find their way. When you do really fancy or cursive type stuff, it gets to be a burden for people. And there are tools online. I can share those links as well. If you're really into typography, there's different ways to figure out like what's the best line heights to go with it. There's a site called the Good Line Heights, and so you could put in a font that you're using or something similar to it and what size, and help get that white space right too, because a good line height is important as well. Alternative text for images. This is where the alt attribute comes in handy for the image element. Think in terms of things that are not decorative, which a lot of things are not. You want to imagine yourself describing it to someone who can't see, and that involves not necessarily everything. Like, well, he's wearing a blue hat, he's got a white shirt on. If that's not important to the context of the image, you don't need to include that stuff. You're wanting to encompass the purpose of that image, and what it's trying to say alongside the text. And if there is visible text with it, you don't need to repeat that visible text, but rather include what you are seeing, and not so much things that have been talked about already. And so the point is not excluding where if this image is removed, what are they missing? Alt text is very much an art and a science. It takes a lot of trying and asking and just trying to figure out what works best. And it really helps if you're the developer, that the designer passes that along to you. And I can't stress that enough, that developers shouldn't be trying to make this up and guess that work when their job is to be putting it all together and coding it up. And so if you can ask that of your team, if you're not responsible for the design part of it and deciding that image needs to be there, to have that alt text come along with it. And that could honestly be included with any Figma designs. There's annotation that you can do. And there's actually a nice annotation kit available online for Figma. Easy to understand. This is for people who write the content. And this one, I feel like it just doesn't get enough love, because people with cognitive disabilities or people with temporary or environmental disabilities, where you're distracted for some reason. I have my kid running around next to me, and I'm trying to access something on the web, and my mind is split at that rate. Just having things easy to understand, front loading the most important content, and then kind of including the explanations and the fluff after that. But trying to write in such a way that it's just easy to get right away is going to benefit not just people with disabilities, but everybody. The Hemingway editor online, which I'll include that link, it's a good starting point to kind of see the reading level that you might be writing at. So pointing out when words might be a little bit harder and above maybe like an 8th grade reading level. Plainlanguage.gov for out of the US. They give you tips on words that you can use instead of and in lieu of, so if you think this word sounds kind of heady, they'll help you find a simpler word for that. So writing easy for people to understand. Making text visible, and this is where I could really go on a riff about labels for buttons, modals, tooltips. I'm one of those that I'd like to see what's available to me right then. And just because modals and tooltips are often hard to make accessible anyhow, if you can include helper text that are visible, if you can include text with the icon button to let me know for sure what this does, because some icons just aren't that intuitive, but somebody had an idea for it and thought it would be good. I think visible text is really good. But if you can't do that, then try to make sure that all of those things are accessible, like the icon has the accessible name with it, that tooltips and modals are keyboard focusable, that the content is read right away once it's open for screen readers. White space and touch targets. This gets especially important for all of the tablets and phones that we use. So you want to make sure there's enough space around text for reading. You want to make sure there's space around things that can be pressed. You want to make sure pressable things are big enough so you're not getting like the fat thumb syndrome and you're touching several things at the same time. This benefits people who do have mobility disabilities. And quite honestly, I think it just benefits everybody when you're using a phone. And so trying to be aware of that. Also, just as a caveat, be aware of your white space of not doing too much white space when you think about if somebody is zooming in and they can't find content because it suddenly disappears. Magnification, I mean. Tab and reading order. Tabbing with your keyboard, that's the easiest test you can do to start your accessibility journey. It's often the first thing recommended to people, that if you can't tab to all the interactive stuff like your menus, your form fields with the keyboard, you've done it wrong. If you can't open a tooltip with a keyboard, you've done it wrong. And that's one of the very basics of accessibility is, can you access all content via keyboard? And also reading order, which really impacts people, I know, as something moves from a desktop layout design to a mobile design. How does that shift around? Does it all make linear sense if someone is going straight through your page or if they're tabbing through your page. Is it going in is the tabbing order matching that visual order to make sure that you're not jumping around? And this is another thing that the design team can help with. They can make annotations of where the tab order needs to be at. You know, here's your 1, 2, 3, 4, and where it needs to go. Headings and other markup. And this is where I'd like to be able to show a screen reader demo for you of just to show how important headings and other markup is.
So I'm switching to the.
So this is NVDA. It's free to download. It's more robust than, say, Narrator. And this is an elements list that comes up through a keyboard shortcut of Insert and Function 7 key. And so it allows people to look at a list of links. It allows people to look through a list of headings, through forefields, buttons, landmarks, the thing that was showing, and it goes kind of fast here, but landmarks, you know, you have a keyboard shortcut yourself that if you're not pulling up the list, you could just jump right to, and without an accessible name, with those 6 navigations that were there on that website, the person doesn't know, like, navigation for what. And the same with heading levels. It gives a tree view and telling you this is a heading level 1, this is a heading level 2, and it shows you how the page is all laid out like an outline and letting you know, okay, these are sections within sections. But if you're not doing your headings right, or even offering headings because you decided that, well, all we have to do is with this div or this paragraph, just make it, you know, like 3 rem or something like that, and bold. And that's not going to be helpful to somebody who needs to skip. There's a particular section maybe they're looking for on your content. So markup is extremely important. The design team can help by labeling, annotating on designs which heading levels things are at and making that make sense. And then it's up to the developer to make sure that they are leaning heavily on HTML elements. There's so many semantics in there aside from headings, you know, so you can give your different sections, labeling things, block quotes, you can do everything, you know, you've already got the basics like image down, but there's so many different ones. I think there's like over 200 elements. So getting a good hold on that will make it so much better experience for a screen reader. List items too, that it doesn't show that in here in the elements list. But when you do an unordered list or an ordered list, when the screen reader comes to that, it'll list and say, ordered list, 6 items. Well, there you go. Somebody has a sense right away. I have 6 items I need to look through on here. And it gives them that context, as in, you know, I might just see the list there, but someone who cannot see it or relies on screen reader needs that context.
Yeah, to be honest, the screen with headings, this is really the best example of why you should use headings, because this is the thing we hear very often. Use headings, remember about the order, but on the other hand, many developers or front-end developers just don't care because it's important that it looked how it should. But this screen just exactly shows why is this structure so important. Overall, HTML itself can be very, very accessible. We are just adding layers and layers of problems on our own to make the websites look better for some.
Right. Yeah. And there are, you know, as a one accessibility expert was saying, I saw a tweet yesterday on Twitter that a lot of problems are solved already too for things that are complicated to make. But there are accessible solutions out there that people have figured out. And a lot of times we try to reinvent thinking we can do it better. And really, if you just spend a little time, you know, as we're always, you know, Googling stuff or looking stuff up on Stack Overflow anyhow, you know, just checking that a solution that's available, if it has hasn't been checked for accessibility before. A lot of that is out there, and we don't have to do it over again. So um, there's not really too much left. It's just why accessibility, talked about that already, whether you have a temporary disability, you're aging, whatnot. I've already talked about who's responsible. Really, it needs to start at planning. Design should be putting in some work to it. Development, obviously, there are things you can do. And then testing and QA can really help stop things from going out before they're made accessible. Where you need to go from here is set your goal. So it's okay to pick a standard like WCAG level 2, level AA, um, to reach those kind of goals. It shouldn't be your be all, but it's a good start to say, we'd really like to aim for this. And what does WCAG 2 say? Educating everyone, that way everyone can take the responsibility and then make it everyone's responsibility. And at this point, if you're starting today, don't let anything inaccessible that hasn't passed certain checks go live. Now is a good time to start where you're at. I know there's going to be a backlog of things to go, and don't be overwhelmed by that yet. Just start working on it today and say, well, we don't want anything that's keyboard inaccessible to go live. So we need to stop that and fix it. And from this point on, we want to make things accessible and start there. And then you can work towards backlog and make decisions. Eventually, you'll get to remediating your older problems or just getting rid of them too. And then check your pulse every so often. Just make sure that, are we still doing well? We've had quite a bit of turnover. Are people trained? How are things doing? And run some more manual tests after the point to make sure things are not going out in an inaccessible state. What not to do: don't discriminate with people with disabilities, because that's what you're doing right now. Stuff isn't accessible. Don't throw money at easy fixes like an overlay. Those different widgets that are out there, those usually turn out to be more trouble for people with disabilities, especially screen reader users. There's a whole website dedicated to this of if you need a business case for it, it's there. Don't ignore the problem entirely. If you don't look at it, it still exists. And then don't stop learning and don't stop improving. You might make a step forward and then say, okay, well, we have other things to do. And that's not a good way to go, because then you're still not making your site accessible. The rest of these sites for training and webinars that are free, I'll share along so we can put those out on the site. Other resources for learning, and then my contact information. And that took a lot of time.
Yes, but it was so much interesting knowledge. I think you covered, I know, almost everything when it comes to basics, because yes, this is where the accessibility adventure can start for everyone. Um, the good news is that there are some tools that can help you, but still there are so many ways which can be automated, where people just have to have some experience with some type of disability and to help to pinpoint the problem and how to solve it. So yes, personally, I also learned a lot. So thank you, And we have some questions. So let's go with them, because, like I said, there are quite a few. So let's start with Pika's question. How can designers and developers work together for a more accessible web?
That's a good question, because you have to. The best way is to get everybody on the same playing field of, maybe you can take the same kind of learning or do the same kind of coursework together to learn how to make things accessible, and then allowing time for those conversations, keeping communication open. So if a developer spots something that they realize isn't accessible, being able to go back and talk to the designer, empowering the designer with the tools that they need, whether it's color contrast tools, whether it's that Figma annotation toolkit that I was talking about, of ways to help developers code better. I think that's a good way to go. and just helping, like I say, keeping communication open and helping each other understand what the other has to go through.
Yeah, I fully agree that the talking part inside of the team is the most important thing. Personally, I sadly had a lot of problems with the designers who thought about their part as art, and you can't change art. So trying to change the color contrast was a lot of problem. And but this is, to be honest, it's not a technical problem because it's easy to change colors. Uh,
Mhm.
this is the part when you have to talk, when you have to set your goals inside of your company or your team. And yes, it's all about talking. So we can say it's quite simple. Just sit and talk.
Yeah, yeah, and it's, as far as the art direction goes, look at what I see through high contrast mode. Your art is still a totally different experience for me. And then there's nothing wrong with what you've chosen. You just need to make sure that it's flexible and understand that many experiences will not experience what you were hoping that they would experience. The experience should be the content is there, it's accessible, and it's available for people to use their own preferences on. And so, and then the rest of the stuff is like, well, this is a nice experience. I like coming to a page that's already set for dark mode. Personally, it's like, oh, well, they thought that out. It's not just like a dampened white on black. They put some thought into it of a little more color, making things stand out more, and it can still have some beauty to it. So if they can think of terms of dark mode, they can still use the art direction as well.
That's true. Yeah. The second question comes from David. Can graphical styling affect accessibility? For example, certain colors, gradients, fonts, graphics.
Yeah, definitely. So the color contrast is always the biggest um, one that you want to make sure things, and not just text on foreground. Anytime you have gradients or images in the background, that can affect it. So you almost need a color picker at that point to be able to decide, is this really going to be excellent? And looking at it too, for someone who needs good contrast, I can usually look at something and be like, whoa, that's not very good. So you kind of get an eye for it a bit. But yeah, definitely, you want anything that's interactive to make sure that it's got a appropriate type contrast or any kind of images that they stand out from where they need to be seen. So it plays a huge role in accessibility for sure.
Next question we have from AC. Is there a best practices checklist of accessibility concerns that would make this easier?
Right. And that is a very common question, and it's hard because you can go to, the W3C Way site, and they have all kinds of stuff as far as for accessibility fundamentals, planning, design development. I believe it's under test and evaluation that they do things like initial checks and things that'll get you started. And these easy, quick checks are a really basic starting points, um, like keyboard accessibility. When you're ready to move on from there, the Ally project, which their homepage would look like this, and they have right at the top checklist, and I would trust them for what they have. They've put in a lot of work trying to find consensus because it's hard to find sometimes among accessibility professionals of just what makes a good checklist. Are we including the most important things? And this kind of breaks down the different ones like, well, here's if you're curious about keyboard accessibility or images or headings, things that you should look at then. Oh, okay, am I doing these different things? Use only one H1 element. Well, that's good. And so that's a good place to start. And then if you really want to kind of dive in more, let's see, I need the quick reference. So WCAG, instead of just looking straight at the specs of WCAG, which is intimidating, they have a quick reference site, how to meet WCAG. And this is when you start to get a little more familiar with WCAG of what it requires. But the coolest thing that I like on here when I was first learning is these filters. And you can pick out, what's the area that you're focusing on. Are you in development or design? And then they have the tags. And so I have a question about color. What do I need to follow in these guidelines for color? Well, I need to know that the use of color, nothing should be relying just on color alone. Also, here's the contrast issue. And this just gets right to the meat of WCAG and lets you get right in. You can do your filtering searches, as well as when you open up the techniques, you can start finding more technical things. At that point, they lead you of like, well, what do I need to do to make this work as I'm learning about it? And so whether it's general, I don't know if anybody's really using Silver Lake too much. And they'll talk about fails. Let's see. I'll talk about, styling for CSS. They'll go on to HTML techniques, PDF, if you're putting PDFs online, and what those should look like, which those need to be accessible because they're online. So that answers your question. There's 3 options right there.
Also, I would say that a great way is to use tools like Axe for automated testing. They are really
Yeah.
they are really a great place to start. Of course, it's important to know they won't find all the problems. They only find 30%, if I remember.
Right. That's usually it. That 50, you'd be lucky if it found 50. It's usually pretty low. It's supposed to be a stepping point to make you really look at your stuff. And so Axe, if you need something a little simpler for, say, like people who aren't doing the coding, but more like design, or people higher up in your business that just want to kind of take a quick look at how the site is, the WebAIM one, that you can have an extension for, or put your website into the WebAIM Wave tool, that will do it as well. And so I have an extension in Firefox where all I do is I added it, and there's a button you press, and then again, this will not tell you everything, but you can get a summary and there's details. And I always find for people who aren't doing the coding end of it, this is a lot easier for them to look at to get a sense. Now, it can be a false sense of security too, like, well, this page just has, one little contrast error. There's a few alerts. I don't know what we need to do about that, but it looks overall okay. But then if I decide to look at Axe, it's going to, and so I have that installed. Axe Pro as an extension. Let's see what's going on. Axe Dev Tools. So if I scan, and it takes just a minute, and this will be more technical because then it starts pointing out your different code. So not necessarily good for a design team per se, but 131 issues, that's totally different than from what WebAIM, was trying to point out. And then I use a bunch of different bookmarklets, quite honestly, to try to get me digging down a little more at a time. People have done.
Also, the good thing about Axe is that they also have a developer tool so we can put it as a part of our, for example, continuous integration pipeline. So
Right.
every time we deploy some changes to our code, it can be tested. So we can see, did we break something, or is it as it was? So
and I have mine set up like as an extension on my VS Code for projects that I work on. So maybe my clients didn't have that installed with their whole setup, but then I can help them catch things and encourage people to have that on their own machines if it's not ready to be integrated into their environment just yet. So, but the best way is to get it integrated into the environment, and then everybody's on board, they see what's going on, and then something doesn't get pushed out when an accessibility problem arises. They could say, whoa, let me fix that. And again, it doesn't catch everything, but it does quite a lot. So.
And I think it's time for the last question we have from Daniel Escobar. It's a long question. It's in two separate comments, but we'll go. I understand the topic is to design accessible websites. However, what is the state of the art in software to help in certain disabilities for websites? For instance, something to help allow reading, and how this is standardized from the point of view of the website.
Right. And so I'd say, screen readers have come a long way, and a lot of people can have contributed work to that. But they're also behind in some ways because it takes time and testing to get things up to meet up with the most cutting edge website stuff. But that being said, screen readers rely heavily on the context and semantics of a page. So if you're using a lot of divs and not giving context of lists, headings, then the person who uses a screen reader, it doesn't matter at that point. It's just like an OCR job. They can read the text, but they have no context. And again, that fails WCAG because you need to make sure that the information and relationships are working as a team and somebody has an overview of what this page is offering them. And so, and not to mention, keyboard shortcuts no longer work. If I want to go to a heading and press the H key, it's not going to take me anywhere. So then I'm forced to go linearly down the page. And the thing to understand about people who are everyday screen reader users, whether blind or low vision or whatnot, they don't traverse your page linearly. Like we might quickly scroll down to browse the page, but they're grasping the context of the page and where do they need to go to get to the spot that they're going to. So it's either like the headings tell them that, the landmarks tell them that, links tell them that. And then also getting a sense of the form fields on the page, like we might scroll to see what kind of questions are asked of us. They can get a quick sense of what it is. And so you strip that away from them if you're not coding well enough for their assistive technology to work. And I know that there's a lot of other things that are trying to pop up with text recognition and images and generated alt text and things like that, which will never replace how humans can describe images. They can help to a degree and maybe try to close that gap, but it's not going to close that gap because there's still that disconnect. Like the software relies on these particular things for good reason. And if we're not helping connect those dots, then, the person is still excluded. And I hope that answers the question that you were trying to ask. So.
Oh, and I found, sorry, one more from Wale. My question, what tool did you say you can provide alternative words to make the text easier to understand?
Oh, there's the plainlanguage.gov. Let's see. Where are we at here? This one? Okay, there's the plainlanguage.gov, which they have some guidelines, and also when you dig around in their site, I think of examples. And then, I know somewhere in here they give a nice list. And then also the Hemingway app, and that's hemingwayapp.com. And this one is you can actually write, so you could copy and paste your text in there. And it gives you kind of some readings on the side of what reading level it might be. It's color coded, so probably not the most accessible for colorblind, but they give you some color coding for like how you're doing, maybe if you're using a passive voice, and how to, that it mostly highlights areas that you might want to rephrase. And then it looks like they use hover to go over to say, okay, this is passive voice. You need to change that to more active voice. So, and then the red color coding is like, well, this is a bit long. Maybe you can break that sentence down a little bit. So those are the two resources I've looked at and been exposed to when I've had to do any kind of content writing.
Okay, so we are out of questions. Amy, thank you very much. You provided so much interesting things about accessibility. Like I said, I also learned a lot. I really hope that thanks to this webinar, some of you will start taking more care about the accessibility aspect of your websites or applications, and that you will encourage your teams to do that too, because it's a really team effort. Everyone
Yes.
in your company has to do their part, because like I said, with about my problem always with the design team, uh, yes, we should do it just together. And thanks to this, we could provide accessible websites. And because of what happened, we didn't at some point when I worked a few companies ago. Yes, but so Amy, once again, thank you. And like I mentioned, we will put all the links from Amy on the webinar website probably tomorrow. So and also, I would like to invite you all to our next webinar that we will be having with Web Dev Studios on February 9th. We will talk why WordPress agencies should use CI/CD. You can visit our webinar page Buddy.Works/webinars to see the dates, so you can register there. Uh, Also, we would like to invite you to our meetup group called Buddy CI/CD group. So if you are interested in knowing about our next webinars, this is also a great place to be. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel to have access and be informed about upcoming webinars. So, thank you everyone for watching, and see you on February 9th. So, bye everyone.
Bye.